This boy was reborn 20 years in the future. In the past, he was considered a living legend, a ninth circle mage. Alone, he sacrificed himself to save everyone. But 20 years later, he awakened in the body of a bastard mage, trapped at level 1. The world was no longer the same, but his knowledge was still monstrous. When Oscar examined his body, he realized there was a good problem. He possessed an absurd amount of mana, which means that in this life, he can use that power to dominate the mages of the White Tower in a world where only the strongest rule. Several people lie dead in one place. Among them is a man with a sword pierced through his chest. He tries to communicate with anyone still alive, hoping to find a survivor. If they can't speak, he asks them to make any sound, any movement. He's practically begging for it. But after several attempts, he realizes he's the only one left. In the reflection of his eyes, he sees the head of the one who must have killed everyone. An enemy who united the demons for the first time, starting a massive war and bringing humanity to the brink of collapse. Not even the children were spared. But the mage began to chant an incantation in the leprechaun tongue, and the child who was about to be devoured was saved. She was transported to another place, delivered into the hands of a woman. This long-haired man, the same one from the beginning with the pierced chest, led the White Tower in battle. He risked everything he had to achieve victory and free humanity. If it weren't for them, that head wouldn't be lying on the ground now. To his surprise, a mysterious woman appeared to confirm the high priest's death. Her name is Edna, the final dragon, the perpetual observer of history. Approaching the master of the White Tower, she told him she had good and bad news. The master chose to hear the bad news first. As expected from the battle, the White Tower was invaded by demons. Most of the mages were killed, and their research was completely incinerated. Quite devastated, he asked for the good news. Edna said the Imperial forces arrived early, saving some survivors and the master's disciples. Even wounded, he said that was a relief. Edna asked if he regretted his decision. The master said no. Each of those fighters was handpicked, and he couldn't regret that choice in the face of their sacrifice. Realizing his time was short, Edna asked if he had anything else to say. The master asked her to look after his disciples as they were still very young. Edna assured him she would check on them from time to time. The master of the White Tower found her formality amusing, and the dragon said he was deserving of such treatment. She and the continent would never forget the sacrifice of the White Tower's heroes. The master agreed, but he carried his own regrets. He hadn't been a good leader. If he had another chance, he would have lived selfishly, just for his own people. That's the kind of life he wished he could live one more time. Finally, life left his body. Edna noted the date and time of the death of the great sage Oscar. It was all documented along with the deaths of the other mages. We were taken back to the White Tower, where a boy seems to be recovering. A small leaf fell on his hand, and that was enough to wake him up. He woke up so abruptly that he ended up hitting the person who was there to care for him. Confused by the sudden reaction, the person said they were just changing the patient's towels. They remarked that his sleeping habits were very strange, and that he showed no gratitude even when being cared for. The boy began to wonder if he had really been asleep, especially in such a defenseless state. Placing a hand on his heart, he realized he shouldn't be alive. He was sure the demon high priest had pierced his heart with that sword. Oscar immediately asked what was happening just as a door in his room was destroyed. Another young man is very interested in the fact that he has woken up. The nurse tries to stop this young man, who seems ready to teach the protagonist some manners. Surprising both of them, Oscar asked how he was still alive. The blonde young man is also surprised. Analyzing his clothes, Oscar concluded he must be a mage from the White Tower. Our boy still hasn't realized what's happened. He ordered the mage to explain the current situation, which made the blonde man very angry. He's not willing to explain anything to this boy who has clearly lost his mind, since he should be reflecting and begging. Our protagonist sensed the attack and immediately thought it was a demon infiltrator. He instantly used a windshield strong enough to break bones. That's what our boy expects to happen. But to his surprise, the shield is slowly fading away. That's when he realized the magic he now possesses is simply pathetic. However, the blonde man's demeanor changed completely. He praised the shield structure, acknowledging that Oscar hadn't been just wasting time. The disciplinary action for what he did will be postponed. It's time to focus on his own recovery. Frank, who had a front row seat to all this, wondered was crazy. The personality of Maxim, the elder who was just in the room, is a bit explosive. But the protagonist is still trying to understand what happened to his body. He asked what day it was. Frank replied that it was September 21st. Our protagonist believes he was unconscious for 5 months. But Frank said it was only one day. Oscar said to contact Lloyd or Gilly, as he wants to hear from them what happened. Frank told him to forget the traitors and not to speak the Tower Master's name so casually. Apparently, he'd forgotten what happened. Lloyd abandoned the tower to become a disciple of the Red Tower. Gilly had stole high-level scrolls. This accusation angered the protagonist, but he soon noticed the air around Frank seemed completely normal. He wasn't lying. Sasha is the Tower Master now, but to our protagonist, he's only 5 years old. But he just found out he's over 25 years old. Frank thinks our protagonist has a very vivid imagination. Finally, our boy decided to look at his own reflection, and at first, he couldn't recognize the image. He started touching his own face and GT, completely confused. After a moment, he realized that 20 years had passed since his death. The city had developed a lot. The streets have artificial lighting, and the vehicles are very interesting. All of this is possible thanks to magical engineering. The protagonist's friends would have loved to see this. In his time, people had given up on everything. But now it's time for him to focus on the present and learn more about this new body. He came from a bankrupt noble family, was taken in by the tower at age 10, and is a level 1 mage, but he's terrible at magic. At his age, he should be much better. That's why he must have felt pressured. He bought an illegal elixir, and after drinking it, he collapsed, which makes sense. If it had worked, his mana would have increased greatly. Analyzing the body, Oscar realized he shouldn't have survived. That's when he noticed something interesting. He has far more mana than a level 1 mage. Most of it is still in its purest, unrefined form. It could be an effect of the illegal elixir. In the middle of that bright glow, a small spot appeared. Our protagonist doesn't know what it could be. Then something dark and viscous dripped from his fingertips. Oscar was quite frightened by it. When the viscous liquid hit the floor, he realized it might be poison, but he can't understand why it would be in his body until he finally reached a conclusion. And now he better understands the situation he's in. The elixir was the perfect cover story. This way no one would discover he'd been poisoned. The poison is what actually killed him. If our protagonist weren't so skilled, he never would have found traces of it in his body. Even without knowing who wants him dead, our protagonist is already determined. He has received a second chance at life, fulfilling the wish he had in his past life. It's time to live a more selfish life, and this isn't such a bad start. Oscar has decided he will avenge this body's original owner. On the outskirts of the city of Syrian, someone is bringing news to an important person. The man sitting in the armchair asked to be called boss, and now he wants to know the news. Their shop was destroyed from the inside. Some mage is responsible, and that made the boss very angry. Witnesses say he was looking for the person who sold the elixir. The boss quickly realized it could be Oscar, who should have been on the verge of death. It wouldn't be possible for him to fight in that condition. The henchmen started to worry that the White Tower might investigate, but the boss said their client is an important person. He was wearing a White Tower ring. Just then, both thugs were startled. Someone said they were being too obvious with their conversation. It's our protagonist who has just arrived on the scene. He tracked the essence still inside the bottle, but he didn't expect so many people to be involved. Quite upset, the gang leader asked how the young man managed to destroy his shop, and our boy said he's very interested in the conversation they're having, suggesting they continue this topic. Hating this petulant behavior, the gang leader ordered his men to finish off the protagonist. His henchman charges at him, swinging his sword. If they want to settle this with violence, our boy will do the same. He moved just one hand, repelling the attack with a wind technique, which was also able to slit man's throat. His head is now decorating the room. Oscar didn't expect just the head to be cut off. The leader of the thugs was terrified by that. Completely enraged, he decided to point a firearm at the boy, firing several bullets at him. This was completely new to Oscar, but with his wind shield, the bullets weren't dangerous. Since he didn't feel any mana in them, he started to wonder how they worked. The mob boss is surprised that the bullets were stopped. Even without understanding how they worked, Oscar returned the bullets to their owner, riddling the thug with holes. Now that he's wounded and on the ground, it's time for him to tell what he knows. The entire place is isolated by a sound-blocking spell. Oscar wished the man would cooperate a little more, and asked who wanted him dead. The bandit said he wouldn't talk, and for that, he got a taste of the protagonist's boot. Since his pride is worth more than his life, our boy is ready to end this, using a spell on the bandit that deeply affected his and GT. That poor victim of society is going into shock. The wind is inside his body, as if thousands of needles were piercing him from within. Oscar doesn't like doing that to people because it's too noisy, so he's with tears streaming down his face. The bandit promised he would tell the truth. Sitting on the sofa, Oscar told him to say everything he knows about the contractor. They received the elixir and a lot of money to sell it. That's a cheap price for our protagonist. Oscar wants to know about the man's appearance, but he had a hood covering his face, so they couldn't see who he was. He was wearing the White Tower's ring. Our boy quickly realized the ring was just used to deceive the bandit. Giving more information, the bandit said the contractor had a very particular scent. It was refreshing like mint. As for what would happen after the boy's death, the bandit knows the magic tower is very busy. Since it lost its position among the 4 towers, an investigation wouldn't happen. This last piece of information worried our boy, but the bandit knows less about it than a mage from the White Tower. Our boy said he forgot some things after consuming the elixir. The bandit said he'd give him some documents. The poor guy had to drag himself to his desk, giving the protagonist everything important about it. Oscar started to read it. Even after defeating the evil high priest, the White Tower's performance last year was catastrophic. It's been in decline for the last 20 years, and the imperial family is about to make an important announcement. Oscar found the lack of progress strange, as he had given several documents to Edna to prevent this from happening. He wants to know what the 4 main towers' businesses are now. The Yellow Tower controls lightning and has a huge advantage in the age of magical engineering, since it was responsible for street lighting. The Blue Tower contributed to the consumption of clean water, increasing agricultural and potion production. The Red Tower is extremely militarized, contributing to the subjugation of monsters. Now it remains to be seen what the White Tower does. Oscar was shocked to discover they make deliveries. That is simply absurd. Since they have mages who can fly, it's a huge advantage for making fast and secure deliveries. Oscar wasn't aware of these wind knights. Mages of the White Tower soar high in the sky, flying with freedom and courage compared to eagles and dragons. Our boy wants to know who had the damned idea to make deliveries. The bandit said it came from the current master. This left our protagonist embarrassed, since Sasha used to be his disciple. Potions are the biggest source of profit for a magic tower. He wants to know why the Blue Tower has such an advantage. He found out they hold a monopoly on the market. 20 years ago, that monopoly belonged to the White Tower. The bandit said they sell clean water at exorbitant prices and bring rain to dry areas. Oscar wants to know why people buy clean water, believing it must be some kind of extravagance for the rich, since it's so easy to find clean water around. This year's White Night Festival is their last chance to prove their worth. There are only 7 months until that day. Wounded by the bullets, the bandit is in agony. He might die soon. Oscar is wondering if he should help him, since he received a lot of important information. But then he saw the notes on what the man used to do: arson, extortion, finishing people off. The man is basically a pile of trash. Oscar left through the window, leaving the bandit to his fate. Now that he's outside, he's wondering if he should be a good person in this life. Upon returning to the White Tower, our protagonist is very tired. He can't even believe he got so exhausted from using such simple spells. In his current state, he might not be able to use the magic that made him one of the greatest mages in history, the Wind Archive. Trying to perform the same technique, it barely held together in his hands. Oscar needs to perfect this body. He started with a magical analysis. He will absorb more information about this body soon. His memories are a mess, and if he wants to save this body, he needs to know its history very well. He is the heir of Count Crushin and the sole survivor of a disastrous fire. He was recognized as a genius from a very young age. Great expectations were placed on him. His grades used to be the highest, and the presentation of his thesis cemented his reputation as a genius. Oscar still doesn't understand why he would be at level 1. That's when he discovered he had mana deficiency syndrome, which left our protagonist very surprised. But if that's true, it makes sense that he's only at level 1. He understands magic very well, but can't use it. The magical analysis was finally complete. Oscar is accessing the results now. That body has no deficiency at all. This isn't a disease. Someone sabotaged the boy. As the disease's name suggests, its carrier can't accumulate magic. A mage can have up to 20 mana circuits, which determines their level. Without them, it's impossible to get past level 3. But the protagonist's circumstances are very different. His circuits were tied by someone on purpose. If he was a genius, he should have known he didn't have that disease. It would be great if he had a diary. According to Frank, the previous user of that body was an alcoholic, but that could have been a persona created on purpose because he already knew someone was trying to end his life, so he started acting like an out-of-control playboy. If this is correct, it makes sense that he succumbed to the temptation of the elixir, even though he couldn't trust anyone. He had to take the risk of breaking those chains. But our protagonist just needs to untie this knot, something he's capable of doing. While handling some books, one of them caught Oscar's attention: the reinterpretation of basic magic. He started flipping through the book, coming across some notes. There were several comments about wind techniques, and the concept in those words is very similar to the protagonist's technique, which isn't limited to the defensive capability of the windshield. The old Oscar also believed he should follow his own intuition. He also created several basic spells, even though he couldn't use them. He performed all those experiments as simulations in his own head. It makes sense that he's a genius, And that's not all. He hadn't abandoned his own studies and was working harder than anyone else. The content of that book is overwhelming for a beginner. He certainly knew the danger that surrounded him, but he had to do everything completely on his own. The old Oscar had to walk his path completely alone, even while carrying the weight of his own history. Our protagonist was captivated by all of this. The time has come to untie the knot that he couldn't, and since he's very skilled, our protagonist will do even more. Those who clipped Oscar's wings will have to pay for what they've done. The next day, the wind blows through the square. Our protagonist doesn't even know why he's walking in that place. All he remembers is falling asleep after trying to undo the knot that was blocking his magical growth. Only then did he hear someone call him master. Oscar saw a version of his past self. It's the dream curse. Every time he sleeps, he's forced to remember the past. He didn't expect this curse to have followed him into another life. It seems to be tied to his very soul, but the dreams of his students weren't corrupted. Everything seemed very peaceful. He's teaching more about the categories of magic, which can be enchantment, acceleration, balance, or special types. Lloyd believes the White Tower pursues harmony, which is why wind magic is more suitable for them. Sasha asked if each magic tower has a personal preference. Her teacher said yes, as they all have different characteristics. The Golden Tower values speed and acceleration, while the Red Tower prefers enchantment and fire. The Blue and White Towers opted for balance. Gileath said he wants to learn acceleration magic because he doesn't like anything too slow. The teacher told him he can't choose. It's something he was born with. And now he's going to show them how it works. It was Sasha's turn to cast the spell, but since it's her first time, it's going to take a while. Then, at the tip of the child's finger, something began to emerge. The energy isn't fast or dangerous. It's balanced. She's the harmonic type, just like the protagonist. The child ended up really liking this revelation. The blonde boy did the same as her, discovering he was the acceleration type. Now it was Lloyd's turn to do the same. A flower appeared on his finger, a sign that he is a special type. The boy wasn't happy about this. He asked if he could change his type, but was told it's a very rare category. He wanted to be like his teacher, who was flattered by those words. He thought about giving Lloyd more lessons and researching a way to change his type. Knowing he would get private lessons made the boy very happy. Our protagonist said that special type mages need a guide, as their path is very difficult. But receiving those lessons made the boy enthusiastic. They made a vow on it. That child's nickname is the man of his word. Even though he behaved maturely, he was still a child back in those days. A noise came from speaker. A broadcast is being shared. Someone is calling for our protagonist, and he doesn't even know how long he's been asleep. But he must go to Laboratory 4202. After waking up, he went to the laboratory and managed to unlock 12 of his circuits. He also obtained 2 monolines, reaching level 2. Knocking on a lab door, he found the blonde professor, who wanted to know how he was doing now, since he lost part of a memory. Our boy said he's fine, which put the professor at ease. Oscar finally remembered Maxim. He was once his junior, and now he's a veteran, one of the sages of that place. He was always honest and intelligent. Our boy hoped he would have a bright future. When he was younger, he used to follow our boy around and always called him master. Happy to know he had succeeded in life, Oscar started to smile, and Maxim asked why he was doing that. He then shared that he heard about the death of some bandits. He asked if our boy had anything to say. Oscar said he didn't know anything, but acknowledged there must be a reason it happened, since they tried to end his life. He drank a poisoned elixir and presented evidence to validate his argument. Maxim now understood why our protagonist had health problems. Oscar said he tried to talk to them, but suffered another attempt on his life. Looking at the amount of money, Maxim realized that those words made sense. In that notebook were notes about the assassination contract. Maxim said he would register everything as self-defense. Oscar was grateful for this, but he took the opportunity to ask for a favor. He wanted to meet the master of the Magic Tower, which shouldn't be difficult since Oscar apparently talks to the master frequently. Our protagonist didn't expect that. On top of that, he can only meet her in the next 6 months. For Oscar, this is terrible, as it will be after the White Night Festival. She's on a business trip taking care of something very important. Oscar asked why she's so busy, but he soon understood that one of the high mages is absent, which is an embarrassing situation. He apologized for his rudeness, but wanted to know what level the master of this tower is. He was informed that she has reached level 7. At her age, Oscar was already at level 9. Knowing his student was talented, he thought she should be at level 8. Maxim said the cut on the body found was very clean, and asked if the boy had been practicing attack magic again. Our protagonist said he trains from time to time. After hearing this, Maxim dismissed the boy. Outside the office, someone else was already waiting. The old man is the vice master of the place, and he came to intercede for the protagonist, asking Maxim not to be so hard on him. This old man's name is Gandalf. Yes, I changed the name. Maxim said he needs to discipline the boy, but Gandalf was the one who brought this genius in and is very worried about him. Even though it's basic magic, it's hard to perfect it at that level. Maxim realized the boy had trained a lot. He's really a box of surprises and might be studying much more than he imagined. Gandalf said they need to meet with the other elders now, who are already waiting. Oscar went to the 10th floor of the tower, the place from his dream. The floor is very empty now, and a gardener found him. He immediately recognized Oscar. This elderly man is named Wilter, responsible for managing the tower's facilities, and he realized the rumors about Oscar losing his memory are real. They used to talk a lot. Our boy didn't imagine the news had spread so quickly. He then asked why he was treated so politely. The old man said he knew the former master, the great Lord Oscar. Another revelation our protagonist didn't expect. That's why he's called Young Master. After learning this, our protagonist asked the elderly man to continue being his conversation partner, but he said he's leaving the tower soon. He's been working there for 40 years. He met 3 masters during that time and had countless colleagues. He only stayed this long because he met the great Lord Oscar. He remembers his words at a ceremony that everyone in that tower is necessary. Our protagonist was moved by this recognition because he was the great Lord Oscar. Even so, the old man decided to leave the place. This left our protagonist surprised. The White Tower isn't doing so well, and its revenue is not what it used to be. Our protagonist asked if the old man was dissatisfied with his job because of the service bonus, something that happens after 20 and 40 years of collaboration, receiving a prize of $200,000 after 40 years. The current White Tower can't afford this prize, and to avoid this embarrassment, the elderly man is leaving before the deadline. That place is his second home, and he thinks of it with great care. Our protagonist had no idea the tower was doing so poorly. He thought the other towers were doing absurd things just for money. He definitely shouldn't look down on other people's work. In the face of need, all our boy has are titles. They don't pay the bills. Thinking about this, he got so distracted that the old man had to call his name. He was worried about how tightly he had clenched his fists. It was so intense, he ended up hurting himself. Oscar asked when he plans to leave, and the elderly man said in 2 weeks. He quickly bandaged him up and recommended that the boy go to the infirmary. Oscar wants them to remain conversation friends. He told him he doesn't have to leave because there's a way to solve everything, and he will make sure it happens, as he knows a method to make a lot of money so that something like this never happens again. Now that our boy remembers what he said, he started thinking about how he could put it into practice. He can only think of lectures and research, but the payment takes a long time, and he's still a level 2 mage. What he needs is a business that makes a lot of money, and the only viable option for that is the potion market. That's when our boy came across an interesting note. What he found could change his situation. In the Vice Master's room, an argument is underway. The woman seems very agitated. She can't ignore this any longer. This is Fidelina, the one in charge of the finances. The Vice Master told her the culprit is reflecting on what he's done. Fidelina argues that a thief is capable of worse, but the Vice Master told her she doesn't need to worry about it anymore, since there's not much left to steal from this tower anyway. But she insists the boy be put in isolation as punishment. Gandalf watches this surprised, since those two are almost 100 years old, and he agrees with Maxim. Isolation is too harsh a punishment. It wouldn't serve the purpose of the punishment. He suggested reimburse the tower for 3 times the amount of the damages. Fidelina said the budget is too tight. They need to make a decision on this as soon as possible. There are many facilities they can't even use anymore. If they sell the materials from the potion room, they could secure another 3 months of budget, but Gandalf won't allow that to happen. This is a place for research and study. These tools are necessary. They can't compromise the future just to pay present bills. But Fidelina doesn't believe there will be a future in their current situation. They've already waited 20 years, and before she could continue, Maxim intervened. Even so, she continued, saying that even if there's a genius out there, he certainly wouldn't choose the White Tower. As they discussed this delicate topic, someone knocks on the door from outside. It's our boy who went to the door, and he did so because he has a suggestion to make. He asked Gandalf if he could start business. Fidelina was immediately outraged, as he's the one who has spent way too much on research. Ignoring her words, and GT, he presented the article he had found. A province is under quarantine due to an epidemic. Gandalf said the news is truly grim, especially if it's the dreaded Cadena flu, because there's currently no cure for it. In the past, the tower had a vaccine, but the recipe was lost 20 years ago, and knowing this, Oscar wants to start his business from this point. He wants to sell vaccines for this disease, a monopoly they once had, and it needs to be revived. Fidelina said it's not even worth listening to the boy's delusions. So far, a lot of money has been invested to recreate that vaccine, but nothing has come of it, and she highly doubts a 20-year-old brat is capable of doing anything. Our boy agrees he's only 20, but there's something different about him compared to the others. He's simply a genius, and there it is, the protagonist's aura shining over the old guard. Obviously, she was furious. She unleashed a torrent of comments about the boy's petulance, and he had to listen to it all in silence. In the middle of her tirade, Gandalf had to intervene. That was a genuine investment suggestion, and even though you're in charge of the finances, you're being far too rude. After that reality check, Fidelina realized she had gone way too far. Now our boy understands why she hates him so much, since she's the treasurer, and for the past 2 years, he's been causing significant losses. However, Oscar asked them to consider his request. He presented the article he'd brought, asking Gandalf to look at the second page. Archbishop Baldwin has changed his plans. Oscar said, "This is very strange. Belonging to the Order of Eltura, there are only 7 archbishops. They're supposed to be incorruptible, but that's not what happens in practice. On pilgrimage, they stay up to a month in the cities they visit, but only when they meet nobles and merchants to get money from them. Siren used to be a large city, but that's in the past. And GT. Maxim agrees with that, but he believes the visit to the city was for religious reasons. Oscar said that if that's the case, it's even more bizarre because the land there is cursed. The pilgrimage route has already been decided for them, and after Siren, they're going to the city of Vince. In all the other cities, they stayed for at least a month each. Siren was the only exception, and it seems this man is in a hurry to get to Vince. During their travels, if an accident happens, they believe it's a curse from the goddess herself, and that ruins their campaigns to become cardinals. If Vince has the disease, the bishop is intentionally stalling to spend as little time there as possible. That's how Oscar understood it. Fidelina praised the boy's interpretation, but said it was just a theory. Gandalf also understood these words, but they can't sponsor the boy based on this. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to fund the other mages here. However, he is willing to invest his own personal money in this. Fidelina found this strategy very risky, but Gandalf is adamant, and he offered 30,000 coins to our protagonist. The problem is, that amount is far from enough. In the potion production room, our boy is facing more problems. It's time to put Plan B into action. He's going to make just one sample and try to get sponsorship from the Archbishop. Since the pandemic puts him in a tough spot, taking money from someone who is desperate is the best thing to do. Oscar is fully prepared to put his plans into practice. After a bit of work, the first vial was completed. For Oscar, that's not a bad result. It's an energy drink. He just made it for a little practice, confirming he still has a knack for making potions. Frank, who was carrying heavy things nearby, started complaining about back pain, but he brought all the materials Oscar had asked for and asked if there was anything to drink as he felt like he was about to collapse from exhaustion. Oscar handed him the recovery potion. It was very good. Frank asked if it had been made recently, praising the mixture a lot. In any case, he picked the freshest herbs for the process. Oscar said he has a great eye for this and should be a merchant. Frank replied he wants to do that after the White Tower finally goes bankrupt, but he ended up getting a few smacks from our protagonist, who couldn't stand to hear that. Getting back to the main topic, he asked what they should do now. Fidelina said he should help our boy. Oscar realized that, in the end, she also wants to help the tower. It's time to organize the ingredients, but he doesn't need an assistant for that. The tower has some problematic young people, and with the right guidance, they could contribute a lot to this place. And one of these troublemakers is Frank himself. Our protagonist is curious about him. It's time to get to know him better. In fact, he noticed something when buying those herbs. They're all poisonous. Black lilies, camellias, and devil's mushrooms. Oscar said they have value as medicine and asked if Frank knows how to prepare them. The young man said he needs to boil them for 12 hours. That part is correct. However, the nutrients are lost in the process. The best way to do it would be through steaming. That way they could minimize the loss of these nutrients to an incredible 98%, just like the White Tower used to do in the past. Frank is very interested in this whole process, and Oscar said that it's easier to work this way. Now it's time to remove the toxins. Oscar does this with wind magic to drain everything out. A mist of poison is now in his hands, but the toxins still need to be isolated. He asked Frank to watch the process closely, which is now underway. Without the toxins, he just needs to mix each of the herbs in the proper proportions. Finally, the cure for the Cadena fever had been created after 20 long years. The process seemed very easy. Now it was Frank's turn to try. Frank watched all this in surprise, as he can't even use 2 spells at the same time, and he's a bit anxious about it. Oscar observes everything. The boy's mana control isn't too bad, even if it lacks stability. However, he has reached the limit of his abilities. Oscar asked what was wrong, and Frank said he doesn't know how to use 2 spells at once. You need to be beyond level 4 for that, and he's only at level 3. But Oscar said he would teach him. Frank knows this is a secret technique, but our boy continued anyway. He said Frank should see it as a partition inside his own mind. On one side, use one technique, and on the other, use the second one. Simple as that. He has to try now, since he has nothing to lose. In the middle of the pink mist, another mist appeared. Oscar congratulated his colleague, who managed to do it on his first try. If it's so easy, he asked why this technique was kept hidden. Oscar said people are greedy. They didn't want to teach it to novices for free, and that eventually became the tradition of the place. But during the war, that justification lost its meaning. They needed battle-ready mages. What they need now is to share knowledge, because these are times of need, just like in war. Oscar said that Frank had done an excellent job, and that he is very talented. He didn't expect him to make that potion on his first try. But that only happened because he was taught very well. There's still a large quantity of ingredients, and Frank is eager to keep working. Since they have larger tools, Oscar suggested they do it all in one go. After a few hours, Frank was completely exhausted. They made 514 vials in total. Maxim interrupted their work, saying they were in trouble. The Blue Tower is in a meeting with the Archbishop right now. They might be too late. If they secure the contract first, it will be a problem. While the others worried, Oscar said it wasn't over yet. That fever is classified as a B-level disaster. Knowing this, there's still something they can try. Maxim was surprised by this revelation. Fortunately, he flies very fast. The Archbishop's guests are ready to meet with him. Baldwin allowed these people to enter. Mages from a Blue Tower are introducing themselves to him right now, and they're already taking their seats in his office. He wants to know how the research for the fever cure is going, and it seems everything is proceeding very well. The Archbishop wants to know when it will be finished, and he was informed they just need to run the final tests. With positive results, they'll get approval from the Empire's regulatory agency for commercial production. However, the test can't be completed in just a few days. They promised to finish everything within 6 months, an unacceptable deadline for the Archbishop. He needs to go to the city of Vince within the next 4 months. The Archbishop's assistant said that more mages had come to visit him. He let them in as well, but he assumed they were mages from the Blue Tower. When he confirmed they weren't with the people in his office, he grew curious about who they could be. Our protagonist is making his entrance now, introducing himself as a level 2 mage from the White Tower. Furthermore, he is there to make an irresistible offer. Baldwin was surprised by the presence of a White Tower mage in his office. Oscar got straight to the point. He said he was there to sell the vaccine for the Caldina fever. Baldwin said the timing was perfect, as the other mages were there for the same reason. Oscar asked if he was late. The Archbishop said no, because the Blue Tower hadn't finished yet, which was great news for our protagonist. The jealous blue mage called Oscar a liar, saying the White Tower has neither the money nor the technology to research a cure. But the Archbishop remained interested, asking if Oscar truly had a cure for the problem. Stating he would never lie to a man of the cloth, he presented him with a sample of what he had produced. Intrigued, the Archbishop wanted to know how many vaccines he could produce, which made the jealous blue mage furious and outraged. The Archbishop told him to stop shouting, since they were the ones who came to the meeting unprepared. Only then did the mage remember something important: bureaucracy. He asked if Oscar had the Empire's approval for it. Our boy said no. So, the jealous blue mage took the opportunity to say that the White Tower had no advantage at all, nor the infrastructure to mass-produce the vaccine. Oscar got angry because the jealous mage belittled the White Tower's history. A clash of egos is about to happen, but Oscar confirmed that the White Tower has more history than them, as it is 5 years older. And despite being small, it's a difference the Blue Tower couldn't close even in 1,000 years, which is actually true. In fact, 20 years ago, the Theon potions belonged to the White Tower. The Blue Mage said that was in the past, and that no one remembered it anymore. Words that deeply and genuinely angered Oscar, letting part of his dark aura leak out, frightening the Blue Tower mage. Oscar was ready to teach him a lesson, but they were interrupted. The Archbishop's secretary said there was an urgent call for him, and it was from the Lord of the City of Vince. To the Archbishop's surprise, the Lord had called to thank him for his kindness, since he had sent them the cure for that dreaded disease. The elders of the White Tower had done it, saying everything was prepared in secret, and that the Lord should be thankful for what had happened. Pleased with the news, the Archbishop asked if there were any side effects to the vaccine, but he soon learned it was incredible. Now, he wants to know when the second shipment of vaccines will arrive, since the White Tower's representative stated the Archbishop would be the one to decide. So, he said they would do it as soon as they are ready. Ending the call, the Archbishop asked if that was Oscar's doing. The Blue Mage tried to say the boy had broken regulations, but he was brutally silenced. Oscar said he understands nothing about laws, much less about war. Only then did our boy remember they were in peaceful times. Things had changed a lot, and the weapon best used by demons was disease. They took time to produce and GT, and even longer to be approved by the regulatory agency. This led to a new law that sped up treatment for those wounded in war, classifying them under special treatment. The Blue Mage said they weren't at war, but recalling the law, Oscar stated there are 3 cases to consider. The first is conflict between and GT. The second is between nations, and finally, when there's a Class B disaster or higher, and this fever falls into that category, so it doesn't need the regulatory agency's intervention. The other mage from the Blue Tower decided to speak up, saying if the useless fools from the White Tower could do it, so could they. However, the Archbishop had already made his choice. It was all over the moment he received that call from Vince, and the Lord already believes they are working together. There's no going back on what happened. The Blue Tower mage even offered to do it for cheaper, but that only made things worse. The Archbishop doesn't want to compromise his image over money. He ordered them to shut their mouths and then remove themselves from his presence. The Blue Mage stood up, very disappointed, but he said Oscar would pay for what he had done. Before they left, Oscar mentioned he had already patented the vaccine. If the Blue Tower wants to produce the cure as well, they'll have to pay royalties to them. This made the Blue Mage so angry that his hemorrhoid burst. The other mage bid farewell to the Archbishop a bit more politely, and as he passed by our protagonist, and GT, he left a trail of an essence that smelled like mint and spearmint. This left Oscar quite thoughtful and perhaps confused about his personal orientation. Now that they were alone, the Archbishop wanted to talk a bit more. It was time to talk numbers. The Blue Tower had mentioned 2 million coins. Oscar said if those guys wanted 2, he could accept 5. The Archbishop was shocked by this aggressive negotiation. A few hours later, the news reached the White Tower. A check for 10 million had arrived in Fidelina's hands, and she was practically in shock. Oscar was responsible for this, and he is being overwhelmingly praised and recognized for his actions. Even Gandalf is impressed and wants to know what happened, as the Archbishop wouldn't give away that much money. Oscar said there were some additional fees, the advertising fees. My God, this protagonist isn't messing around. An official announcement was to be made by the White Tower and GT, stating that the Archbishop had a revelation about the epidemic, which is why they managed to make the vaccine in time. Since he wants to become the next cardinal, receiving a revelation from the goddess is very helpful for achieving that goal. That's why he paid so much. Now, the White Tower needs to send the vaccines in just 1 week. Gandalf is impressed by all this. The amount is absurd. Fidelina has already forgotten about the punishment she wanted to give the protagonist. Oscar said he needs mages for the job, those above level 4. An announcement must be made in the tower, and Fidelina asked what she should say. Gandalf told her to invite mages of level 4 or higher. They would be paid and would receive meat at every meal. Within a few hours, several candidates appeared interested in the very tempting offer. Oscar asked his seniors to pay attention, but he was immediately ignored by everyone. Our boy used a sound magic that began to bother everyone's ears. Now that he had their attention, he said they needed to make the vaccines, and he needed everyone's help. But some of the seniors weren't so inclined to listen to the protagonist. Oscar wasn't expecting something like this. He asked Frank why they didn't like him, and the boy said the protagonist had done a lot of things in recent years. He is annoying and arrogant on top of being an alcoholic. The girl had some questions. The vaccine's production method was lost, and she wanted to know how they were going to do it. To the surprise of the onlookers, Oscar said he recovered the method. They immediately thought he wasted money to get something untested. However, Oscar assured them he had already run tests, and the White Tower already has a contract for it. Knowing that leaking the recipe could be catastrophic, everyone became very apprehensive. So, Oscar was honest. He doesn't know why those students are still in the White Tower. The girl didn't like his attitude and said she wasted her time coming here. She added that anyone with common sense wouldn't stick around to hear what he had to say. However, Oscar said he knows what each of them had to give up to remain at the White Tower. He knows that Lena, a level 5 mage, was scouted by the Red Tower and rejected several offers. Apparently, the protagonist had read the files on every single one of these background characters, even the girl with glasses who looks like she belongs in the B-list cast. He even admitted that he might not have had the willpower to refuse the offers they received. Despite that, no one left the White Tower. Lena realized the elders knew the students were being scouted, but they had no choice but to pretend nothing was happening as they didn't want to pressure the students. And right now, this is the darkest and most hostile winter the White Tower has ever witnessed. Even so, the mages chose to stay. That's why Oscar decided to trust them and share the recipe. If he couldn't do it with people so loyal, he couldn't do it with anyone. But if they didn't want to help, that was fine. He would understand. Our boy even pretended to cry. Now it was time for the level 2 mages to get to work. Oscar put on his personal protective equipment. Lena started to approach him. She asked if she needed to put on goggles too, and the others seemed more willing to help as well. Frank never thought Oscar could be so convincing one day. He even told his colleagues the meat in their meals wasn't pork, which sparked some comments. As long as it wasn't rat, it was fine. However, everyone went wild when they found out it was beef. The vaccines were made perfectly, 140% over the required amount. A week later, Oscar walked through the tower, seeing petals on the ground. The old janitor must have done it. He must have returned to work after all the good things that had happened. Our boy was now reading the newspaper. The pandemic had come to an end, and the Archbishop's image was boosted by all of this. Everything was going according to plan. Frank approached happily, bringing news. The orders for the vaccine just kept coming in. Even the Empire was interested. Oscar said that for those who don't want to die, it's obviously necessary, but the demand would soon die down. After this pandemic, the next one would take decades to happen again. Still, Oscar assured him that money wouldn't be a problem. He already had new potions to produce. Frank thought it would be something miraculous, but Oscar assured him they would be low-level potions. The boy thought it was the Star's Tear, a very famous potion from the White Tower. They say it can even bring the dead back to life. Making it now would cause a lot of problems. They needed to increase the White Tower's power first. Since Frank was already there, Oscar asked him to bring more materials. It was time to work. He asked for some herbs that are Siren's main product. However, Oscar learned that the fields where these herbs were grown no longer existed. To Francis' dismay, he went to the fields in person since he didn't believe it, and they couldn't go by carriage as the path was a bit too rough. So, they needed to walk a few more kilometers to reach the place Oscar wanted to visit. Oscar was surprised by something else, too. He mentioned miles, but now they were using a different unit of length, the meter. It was something he would have to get used to again. After walking for a while, they found a house. Frank knocked on the door, hoping it was inhabited. A mysterious man answered, asking who the visitors were. As they introduced themselves, a few cars approached the place. A seemingly wealthy man wanted to know if the landowner was now thinking about selling the land to him. The landowner was an elderly man who definitely looked like he used steroids recreationally, and he was not interested in selling that land at all. Almost like an emissary of Satan, the potential buyer made absurd offers. But the old man didn't want to sell. His name is Ivan, and he's an herbalist. Pressing hard, the buyer said the land would lose even more value with the arrival of factories. However, Ivan knew that as long as he was there, the factories couldn't be built. Knowing he wouldn't get anywhere, the buyer decided to leave. Before leaving, he acknowledged he'd stepped on some herbs and decided to compensate for the damage. He left behind a large wad of cash. Ivan just watched as the men drove away. But the buyer noticed the visitors' clothes. They must be mages and started wondering what they could be doing there. He soon found out that the White Tower had made a lot of money selling vaccines. This made the buyer furious with his driver for only telling him now. With the White Tower support, it would be even harder to buy that land. Willing to play dirty, he asked if his driver still had contact with the mercenaries. Now, he wanted to end the old man's life and have him listed as missing, so the land would go up for auction. It would be suspicious, but that buyer had the political backing for it. The problem was what might happen if the White Tower decided to intervene. However, the buyer believed the White Tower was just a bankrupt and nothing more. Later, Frank watched the stars. Ivan had let them stay the night since it was late, and the journey back was long on foot. Oscar agreed that Ivan must be a good person. He remembered what they had discussed earlier. The man was very loyal to the White Tower because of everything that had happened. They also learned about the buyer's reputation. He was involved in shady dealings and was also violent and criminal. For 3 years, he'd been buying up land in that region, and some herbalists had gone missing. Ivan said he couldn't be a target for that thug, and he hadn't sold his land because he was a great defender of the region's herbal culture. Because of that, he had protection from the imperial family, which is why he had resisted for so long. Oscar asked why he didn't sell the land for an absurd price, and Ivan said the answer was obvious. He loves this land. It has been his home since he was born, and it will be until his last days. That's why Oscar agreed that Ivan was a good person. This place was far from the city, and the stars seemed to shine more brightly. Frank said he was envious of that lifestyle, which must be much more peaceful and pleasant. A genius like Oscar should understand him even better. Our boy said that Frank was also promising, but Frank thought it was just empty praise. Oscar said that wasn't true, as he would never do such a thing. And having had access to the old Oscar's notes, he didn't understand why Frank was labeled as problematic. In the past, Oscar could see the stars easily, but now the city lights prevented it. Frank wanted to know if they could really revive the herb industry, and our protagonist said it wouldn't be impossible, but they needed to talk to Ivan about it the next day. That's when our boy reacted with a start. There was someone else there with them, for in total, and Frank started to get worried, too. Oscar realized that if Frank hadn't noticed their presence, these people were not friendly. One of the bandits had already proposed to end Ivan's life, but was turned down. He realized things had changed. The old man with him didn't even care. He just wanted to get paid. The third man with him told him to stop talking nonsense. There might be a mage in this place, which is why they needed to be cautious. The youngest assassin was ready to enter the house. Using his lock-picking skills, he believed Ivan must already be asleep. He carefully entered the house and went straight to the bed, believing it would be an easy task. That's when he noticed something that terrified him. He immediately ran outside, terrified. But our protagonist had already used one of his spells, piercing the extra skull as if it were nothing. Oscar realized the wind bullet was a really useful technique conceived by the old Oscar in his notes, using practical concept from firearms. Oscar went outside, knowing he had to do the same to 3 other people, but he was surprised to see only 2 men, an old man and a redhead. When asked what he did to the other bandit, Oscar replied that he put him to sleep forever. The old man expected something like this would happen to that stubborn guy. The redhead asked for the herbalist location, saying he would ignore what happened to his companion. Oscar won't do it. So, the redhead said there would be violence. He ordered the old man to attack, and he did so with the vitality of a celebrate young man. But our protagonist defended himself with his wind shield. After stopping the attack, it was Oscar's time to move too. The old man was impressed by all that agility, but he was already prepared to surprise our boy with another blow revealing that his spear could actually split, becoming a very versatile weapon. This way, the old man believes he'll end it all now, but the protagonist had already cast a spell on the tip of one of his fingers. Oscar said that this fight is way too boring, throwing 2 small wind spheres towards the old man who tries to defend himself from them. With one of his blades, he tries to parry that attack. Seeing that the metal wasn't resilient enough to absorb the impact, the blade was destroyed. Oscar said that the weapon might be versatile, but still useless. But just then he felt real danger, something visceral, and our boy immediately moved away from the old man. Someone just brought a firearm to the battle. A shot was fired and the old man's skull was pierced. Our protagonist is still on high alert. The redhead had done that to his own companion, and he said that if the protagonist hadn't moved away, he would have been pierced too. Oscar asked if they weren't allies, and the redhead explained that he was a subordinate. He can be replaced. This is why he hates criminals, as they have no scruples. Oscar wants to know what that toy is, and the redhead stated that it's too expensive to be just a toy. Our boy believes there are 3 spells on it: acceleration, strengthening, and penetration. This made the redhead much more serious as our boy had figured it all out. Oscar said that must be it since he wasn't able to block the attack. Despite being arrogant, the redhead acknowledged that he has talent. He even asked if he'd like to work with him, stating the pay would be very generous, but Oscar refused since it would end with a big itch on his head, if you know what I mean. With that, there was nothing left to discuss. Oscar had to seek shelter from the shots. The former master of the White Tower is cornered. With only half his mana available and knowing that wind bullets are slower, he needs to think of something. The only window of opportunity is when the enemy reloads the weapon, which can only fire twice and takes a second and a half to reload. Amidst the plantation, the redhead is looking for our boy. Finding an opportunity to act, Oscar charges forward using an acceleration spell. But the redhead found him easily and even mocked the moment. It would be impossible to dodge that, and his aim is completely clear. But to the thug's surprise, the bullet didn't pierce the wind barrier. It simply went around it. Now Oscar has an opportunity to attack. While the bandit reloads his own weapon, he's trying to understand how that had happened. Something happened to that shield. When he looked forward again, Oscar already had his finger pointed at him at point-blank range. In his last moments, the bandit tried to understand how a low-level mage had done all that. Oscar said he would never understand, even if he were taught. After finishing off the enemy, that object captured Oscar's attention. A very problematic artifact he recognizes. On its body, Trinity is written. It must be related to acceleration, strengthening, and penetration. A truly incredible weapon. Winning against it wasn't easy. Oscar used friction reduction on the shield, making the bullets circle around it instead of piercing it. But if the theory had been wrong, his body would have been fatally pierced. Returning to the tower, he decided he needs to learn more about how to defend against things like this. But now, he needs to make sure that Frank and Ivan are safe. After all, our boy had sensed the presence of 4 people. In the middle of the forest, Frank is protecting the old man. He told Ivan to go ahead, as he would hold off the thug. He assured him that he's very strong for a novice mage and would meet up with the old man soon. Ivan decided to take his advice, wishing Frank to be cautious. The bandit said he's too confident, and Frank asked why he didn't decide to chase after Ivan. However, the bandit is more interested in this mage and GT, his future victim, even though the old man is his target. He wants to know why people still respect the White Tower. That's why he decided he would end his life first before anything else advancing impetuously. But Frank used Wind Slash to defend himself. The bandit not only dodged, but also attacked right after saying that it's too easy. About to pierce Frank, he asked him to do something more fun. It was then that the bandit realized something was wrong. He doesn't feel like his sword went through anything. Something is wrong, and by the time he realized it, his sword had already been grabbed by Frank's hands and his neck. Well, his neck wasn't so intact anymore. The poor bastard is dying, drowning in his own blood. Frank was really hit by the sword, but he revealed that he has a somewhat peculiar and unique physical constitution. After that, the thug's body fell to the ground lifeless. Our protagonist is hidden behind a tree. He saw the whole thing. He realized that Frank isn't just a special type of mage. He also managed to turn his body into wind. To defeat this, only energy blades or powerful magic would work. Our protagonist has only seen something like this in books and about one of the former masters of the White Tower. Upon appearing in the clearing, Oscar ended up scaring the boy. Frank asked when our boy had arrived, and Oscar said he was worried, but complimented Frank on defeating the thug. Now, they need to know where Ivan had gone. Frank started yelling for him, and our protagonist realized that the processor in Frank's head might be a Core Duo, which isn't very good. It might even be a Pentium. Sensing the old man's energy, Oscar pointed in the right direction. At dawn the next day, Ivan thanked them for their help. If it weren't for these young men, he wouldn't be alive. Frank said he didn't do much. However, the protagonist made a point of saying that he let one of the thugs escape, and Frank was fundamental to the old man's survival. This ended up making Frank very embarrassed. Now everything is resolved, or so they believe. That damn buyer won't give up, and Ivan said this land is the best in Siren, and its location is perfect. In the last 8 years, the land's productivity has greatly reduced, a result of magical engineering and its progress, which is polluting the waters. This could be a permanent problem for land exploration and herb cultivation. Oscar has something to ask this old man. He asked if his loyalty is related to the fourth master of the White Tower, Ajax, and the old man said yes. Back then, they saw herbalists differently and were called warlocks. They avoided being seen by others and lived a nomadic life until a savior appeared to help them, a man famous for his ideas, Reynold Ajax, who invited them to live in that city so they could have some peace and rest. Not even Ivan knew so many details about the story, and our boy said he learned it from a book, but only the Tower Masters have access. He didn't mention that part. That's why the herbalists gathered in that city. For the first time, the nomads had land and comfort. The White Tower gave his ancestors all of this, so he wouldn't stop being grateful. Oscar thanked the man for his hard work. He affirmed that the White Tower would still be with him. But because of what happened, the imperial family wouldn't remain silent about this attack. The problem is that bureaucracy is slow. However, Oscar guaranteed that this time they will be very fast, as he's going to sign a contract with them that day about the Caldina fever vaccine. In that damn buyer's office, there's a great hurry. They need to flee. Things had escalated into a very problematic situation, but that's not going to happen because armed men arrived to deliver justice. The superintendent of the Empire's internal affairs came personally to capture that thug. The accusations are numerous, and he's about to leave that place in handcuffs. If he resists arrest, with any luck, he won't leave there at all. The bandit tries to say he's innocent, but it will be up to the judge to decide that. Sweating bullets, the thug realized he needs to contact his superior to escape this. So he asked if he could smoke his last cigarette, but the superintendent ordered his men to cuff him right away. They were wasting time there. The bandit said this is a mistake and asked if they know who protects him, but the superintendent ignored the threat. After all, he is under the Emperor's orders to resolve this. As the bandits are being led away, one of those men asked the superintendent a question. I wonder who that guy is. They acted so fast. He must be someone important. They got an order from above. It seems the Emperor really loves the White Tower, but not even the superintendent understands it. He knows about the place's heroic past, but that was a long time ago, and the present is unfolding differently. Looking at the sky, the superintendent told his subordinate that it all happened 20 years ago. He was 12 back then when humanity finally won its freedom from the demons. And in those days, the White Tower was a completely different institution. The older ones still remember that time, the glory of the past, but now they have to go. There's still work to be done. They're heading east to find the factories polluting the region's water sources, something the superintendent is doing on his own initiative. And now he's thinking about Oscar and Frank, the white mages who took care of everything and dismantled a dangerous gang. The subordinate asked if they could eat first, but the superintendent said they'd do it later. Back at the White Tower, Frank is relieved and Oscar is going to report everything to his superiors. But before they could go inside, they were found by Gandalf. Frank tried to make an excuse, saying he had something urgent to do. Gandalf found the young man's sudden departure strange, and Oscar explained that he just had something to do. Getting straight to the point, Gandalf said that Oscar had handled something big and he would hear the report in his office, where Oscar was already heading. Once there, Oscar noticed the old man seemed a bit down, as if something had happened. Gandalf asked if he'd heard anything from Frank. Oscar said no, asking if something was wrong. It seems the Sirius family is going to take the boy away. Our protagonist wanted to know if Frank had agreed to it, but Gandalf wasn't sure. It seems the negotiations on the matter were already finalized, and he doesn't know any of the details. Frank was already packing his things in his room when he heard a knock on the door. It was our protagonist who already knew what was happening. Frank is the youngest son of a great merchant family in the Empire. He has to return to his family's company and get married to follow their tradition. By all indications, it's an arranged marriage. Frank knows the girl is a good person. Our protagonist asked if he agreed with it. The boy said that even without knowing her, his future wife must be a good person. But Oscar wasn't talking about the marriage. He asked if abandoning magic was really the right thing to do. Frank looked saddened by GT, believing he has no talent, which is why he's giving up. The boy thought he was special, so he went to the White Tower, which has fewer prodigies, hoping he might stand out. But he soon discovered the reality of his situation. As he was venting, Oscar told his friend to listen. He thought he was going to be scolded for what he said, but was surprised to hear that he is very talented. This seemed to shift his focus. Even happy with the compliment, Frank still wasn't considering staying. His older brother then arrived. He quickly assumed our protagonist was a friend, but told him they had 5 minutes to leave. Before he could leave, our protagonist asked the man how much it would cost. To be precise, he wanted to know the price of France's stay at the tower. The man demanded to know who our protagonist was to make such a proposal. Oscar confirmed he was a friend and the one responsible for making the vaccine. Grant then introduced himself. He is that fool's brother and the eldest son of the family. Ignoring Frank, our protagonist made his proposal. Grant started to think he was an idiot. The child wanted to negotiate with them, but our protagonist guaranteed there would be no losses for either side. In 2 years, Frank would be one of the best mages there. In the long run, it would also be very beneficial for his family. Grant was intrigued by the proposal and asked what would happen if they failed. Oscar offered the profits from the vaccine for the next 50 years, guaranteeing that the tower's vice master would witness the contract. So Grant asked if he was going this far because his brother was worth something, or if he was doing it just for friendship. Our protagonist said the answer was obvious. The boy was truly valuable. He wants to restore the White Tower's reputation. And for that to happen, Frank is a key piece. Grant said the boy was very young, but as a merchant, he couldn't ignore the other party's naivety, and he decided to add a condition because Oscar had forgotten something fundamental. Merchants value trust above money, and the protagonist needed to prove his worth. He has a level 5 knight as a guard. The next day, Oscar would have to prove his skills in battle. Only then would he agree. Since our protagonist is a level 2 mage, the knight wouldn't use energy in his sword. Oscar realized when to give up the marriage, a sign that the other family must also be influential. As he left, Grant said they would see each other again at noon. If our boy didn't show up, it meant he had given up. Frank was now desperate, worried about what might happen to his friend. This was happening because his older brother was furious and wanted to humiliate our protagonist. Frank suggested they try to talk it out, but the protagonist was adamant. A level 4 mage could win. Frank was completely shocked. He couldn't believe the protagonist intended to reach that level in a single day. However, someone already stable at level 3 could advance to the next level, and the condition wasn't to win. It was to prove his skills, something the protagonist could do because his strategy was much more interesting than that. The level 4 mage who would show up for the battle was Frank himself. In the training room, Frank was uneasy. He had tried this for a long time and still hadn't succeeded. Our protagonist told him to trust him, to relax, and start circulating mana through his circuits. Watching his concentration, Oscar said it was satisfactory. However, he made some key observations about areas where he was losing energy in his mana circulation. Frank asked if all geniuses could see that. Our protagonist said he was the only one. Surprised, Frank asked if fixing it would make him level up, but the protagonist said it was irrelevant as most mages ignore things like that. However, it's something archmages don't ignore, and from now on, he would do it every morning. Our protagonist gave a long theoretical explanation of what needed to be done. Frank had to pay attention to all those details to keep evolving. Now it was time to address something else that had happened before. The magic he had used during that battle in the Urgarden. Apologizing, Frank said he couldn't do it, making it clear it wasn't due to a lack of trust in the protagonist, but he was terrified. The last time he used that technique, he almost died. He grew more anxious as he got older because his family had great expectations for him. So, he decided to focus on what others couldn't do. He tried not to limit the magic to a single part of his body. If he were made of wind, he would be incredibly powerful, a thought that proved to be reckless. Initially, he thought it had worked, but then he panicked. He couldn't stop the reaction. Half of his body turned into wind, and his mana spiraled out of control. Naturally, Frank panicked and called for help. If he hadn't received aid, he certainly would have died. Back then, he couldn't do anything on his own, and he still remembers the feeling, something he never wants to experience again. However, the protagonist pointed out that he used the technique very well. Frank explained that it activates naturally in dangerous situations, which is pretty pathetic. But our protagonist didn't see it that way. Mages face problems in GT and GT, and the solution to this one is very simple. Frank needs to learn to control his mana even better. The problem is that depends on talent, and he doesn't know how to get around that. Oscar confirmed there was a way to perfect this skill, drawing a summoning circle on the floor. Frank asked if he was going to make a contract with a demon. Our boy said that none would appear even if they were called. What he was going to summon now was a spirit, a wind spirit, to place inside Frank's body. Determined to improve, Frank made a grand oath to the wind spirit. But so far, nothing happened as his affinity with spirits was very low. Frank said he felt a slight breeze, but the protagonist assured him it was just his own disappointed sigh. However, he shouldn't get discouraged. Few humans have an affinity with spirits. Frank despaired once again since this was his only way to better control his mana. But the protagonist said there was another method, a spirit summoning technique he learned in his past life in the company of the elves. Now, it was our protagonist's turn to try. He was sure the Spirit King would remember him. In the past, he hadn't done this in a training room, but in front of the world tree itself. With just a few words, Oscar asked the wind spirit to come to him. A strong gust of wind swept through the place. He actually succeeded on his first try, and a spirit appeared before him asking if that human had summoned it, the first time in 27 years. Oscar said he wanted to make a contract and asked if the spirit needed anything. The spirit assured him that no formalities were needed, but it asked if he wanted to form a friendship connection with the High Spirit Celestine. Our protagonist said no. This left everyone very surprised. Only then did he remember he should have started with that part. Actually, the one who needed a spirit was a boy who was also there. The time for the duel had come. Everyone was already gathered. Gandalf was there, too, acknowledging that the vaccine's inventor was indeed very stubborn. Grance's knight was introduced. He was truly a level 5. The battle would be simple. Whoever took the other's necklace would be the winner. If there was no victor in 5 minutes, Grank would accept defeat. Oscar liked those rules and was eager to start. They asked if it was okay for him to fight in those clothes, to which our protagonist said yes, since he wasn't going to be the one fighting. Frank finally presented himself to them. This left his brother completely speechless, unable to understand what was happening. Oscar remembered the terms of the bet. He needed to show his skill, and he had masterfully taught Frank the day before. Grant was furious about this, assuming that by putting his brother forward, his knight would go easy on him. But the protagonist disagreed, believing a level 4 mage had a better chance of winning. Grant was surprised, knowing his brother was level 3 just yesterday. However, for Frank to become an elite mage in 2 years, our protagonist had to prove his methods. Grant told his knight not to go easy, and our protagonist told Frank not to be scared. He just needed to do as he was taught. The boy tried to summon his courage, but he agreed. Now he was completely determined to win. The knight greeted the young master very politely. Finally, the match was declared to have begun. Frank immediately started creating distance, moving away from the knight. This was also part of the strategy. That's when the boy felt a threatening energy, and it was coming at him in the form of a dangerous sword, an absurd pressure. That enemy was truly level 5. Even without using energy, he was still intimidating. Frank was nearly paralyzed with fear, but slowly, he began to remember the previous day, the protagonist's words. Oscar was also being an excellent friend, enough to make Frank even braver. He managed to produce a blade of wind in the battle. It was time to claim victory. This was the first time in his life he'd heard someone say they needed him. As he attacked, Frank didn't want to disappoint our protagonist. The knight defended with ease, but noticed the young master had grown stronger. He could even use 2 spells at once, but perhaps it wouldn't be enough, and the knight decided he had observed enough. It was time to go on the offensive. Frank was already cornered. Blocking that attack would be impossible. Even in GT, he used the wind blade one more time. Grant watched the fight from the sidelines, curious how his brother had progressed so much in a single day. He asked the protagonist if he had used some forbidden technique, but our boy assured him the method was safe, that he didn't need to worry. However, Frank's growth was clear to everyone watching the fight, but the knight was determined to win. Since Frank was not a battle mage, a bureaucratic job would be much better for him. After being pressured, the knight was about to take the necklace from his neck. Grant thought he had won, and our protagonist said the battle was over. This left the young man very intrigued, not understanding why the protagonist had started to smile. Last night they trained hard. The mastery of wind was perfected. However, Frank was still traumatized. He wouldn't be able to easily turn his body into wind. However, it was still possible to use the spirit's power. Oscar was about to explain something very interesting about the contract, the part where he could use a great power, unity, capable of turning anything that touched his body into wind. He had to hide this until the end of the battle to surprise his opponent. The knight didn't even have time to notice, but something had happened right before his eyes. Frank was in possession of the necklace and of victory as well. Not even Frank himself could believe what had happened, but after a moment, he started celebrating like a child. Grant knew that technique was the wind god, something his brother shouldn't be able to use again. Gandalf said the match was over and asked if Grant agreed with the results, but the young man was completely surprised as our protagonist had taught his brother for only one day, enough to make him achieve a new level of power. So, he decided to acknowledge the defeat. Gandalf said it was a long journey and a shame the young man had to leave so soon. However, Grant asked them to take care of his younger brother, acknowledging that he had grown up a little more. Since Frank didn't understand it was a compliment, he asked his brother to repeat it, but he had already lost his patience. So, he decided to leave. Oscar found what his friend did very funny. Frank did it on purpose, pretending he hadn't heard the compliment, but the next day, he was confronted with a harsh reality. He would have to go through that door, except it didn't look like a training room. That dark energy seemed to come from prison. Our boy said it had been used as one, but that was hundreds of years ago. Frank said he'd done nothing wrong and asked why he had to train in isolation, but this was an order from Gandalf himself, who already had great expectations for the boy. Frank was devastated as he hadn't even had a chance to rest. It was up to him to use this time to perfect his techniques. Our protagonist said he could do it, but the poor guy was heartbroken. Closing the door, our protagonist mentally apologized since he was the one who had requested that training. 30 days of isolated training. Oscar said it was absolutely necessary. Knowing it would be difficult to endure, the old man acknowledged they needed to take good care of the boy when he returned. Furthermore, the young man's family company was sharing its distribution route free of charge. Oscar quickly realized that Grant was a visionary. The success of the White Tower could bring them great prosperity, which wasn't bad for anyone. That was excellent news. The old man also had something to ask the protagonist. He asked if he would like to give a lecture. Oscar was caught off guard by this, acknowledging that he was capable of doing something like that. However, he was supposed to be more focused on the potions department. Intrigued, our boy asked Gandalf if there was a specific reason for this. The old man noticed that our protagonist picked up on things easily. He asked if he had ever heard of a Night of Mages, a day when the mages from each tower gathered to show their skills and growth. It was created by the Emperor so they could grow closer, but in practice they fight every time it happens. It should have been canceled a long time ago. Oscar wondered why the old man was bringing it up now. The details will be announced by the Imperial family in the new year, and Gandalf's real fear was the Black Tower. Since they want to be one of the top 4, the White Tower could be attacked, so they needed to be cautious. This was more than enough to fill the protagonist with determination. Like a JoJo character, he guaranteed he would do it. Walking through the halls, Oscar was furious. The Black Tower was so arrogant to think they could do that. At least Frank was now level 4. It all happened because the spirit remembered our protagonist keeping its promise. The truth is, that spirit didn't like being summoned by one person only to make a contract with another. Oscar summoned the spirit one more time to give a message. Tell Salafrian of the Silence that the white mage has returned. At first, the wind spirit was furious because our protagonist spoke the Spirit King's name. But what surprised it most was the true identity of this human, which made the Spirit King issue a command. Oscar said he won't spoil the fun by revealing who it is. He was informed that Salafrian has already given his approval. It won't be a contract, just a transplant. That's enough for our boy. He also has a message to listen to, a reminder of an old promise he made, a promise our protagonist intends to keep. He couldn't fulfill in his past life because he ended up dying. His lecture was announced, a reinterpretation of the basics of magic. Before fulfilling his promise, our boy needs to take care of that family, too. A red-haired boy was walking by and quickly recognized his classmates. While waiting for the lecture, He asked if it was only for level 3 students since he hadn't seen anyone of a higher level. A girl mentioned she thinks the tower is improving, especially since Gandalf himself encouraged this. It's in the same place where the Imperial Observation Seminar was held. The lecturer must be someone impressive. Overhearing their conversation, someone told them to stop joking around. You're making too much of a fuss over something so simple. He introduced himself as Damien, son of Count Proud. A girl, Rosa, said he was being too negative. The tower was finally investing in something, and they believed the lecturer had to be qualified. But among everyone there, only one low-level mage was absent. Their conversation was immediately interrupted. Someone had blocked all sound in the room. None of the students could speak. Our protagonist said, "It's a pleasure to meet you all. From now on, I will be the one to present to you the reinterpretation of the basics of magic." Obviously, all the mages were surprised since our boy was only at level 2. In GT. Still, you could see the displeasure on all of their faces. Oscar announced that anyone with a complaint could leave now. They weren't students subject to a professor's control. However, there was one condition. They had to prove they were skilled enough not to need his lesson. The time limit was 10 minutes, and within that time, they had to declare that they didn't want to stay for the class. Something very simple to execute. The students were outraged. It wasn't simple at all because of the sound blocking magic, but they soon saw it as a test. Since the lecturer was only level 2, it had to be solvable. This was his way of saying that if they couldn't do it, they had to stay and listen to his lecture. Oscar was eager to see their abilities. He had intentionally left a few openings in the spell, but that didn't mean it would be easy. Only a few minutes remained, and no one had managed to do anything until a boy stood up cheerfully. Damien believed he had succeeded. Our protagonist knew he was a beginner. He decided to congratulate him. The boy said it was easier than he had imagined. Then everyone heard a sudden noise signaling the end of the 10 minutes. Damien was the only one who had overcome the challenge, and as promised, it was up to him to decide whether to stay or not. The truth was, he was very curious. Leaving would be great, but the challenge had intrigued him. Guessing exactly what the boy was thinking, Oscar decided to give him a prize. He would teach him a spell as a reward. He asked which basic spell he liked the most. Damien said he liked Windblade. Oscar asked him to demonstrate it, and the boy obeyed. After finishing his demonstration, he asked if that was enough. Oscar said it was very good, but he was going to teach him Windblade. Damien asked if our protagonist couldn't see what he had just done. Oscar replied that it didn't meet his standards of quality. Grasping the blade with his bare hands, he said it had 2 serious problems. First, this spell isn't made of wind, and with that, he crushed the blade with his own hands. Oscar asked if the boy knew what wind was made of, explaining that wind only exists when there is air movement. Therefore, the technique he had performed was not Windblade. All students should pay attention to this. The magic of the White Tower requires a constant flow. Otherwise, it will be destroyed just as